Hello and welcome back to the Karma Stories podcast. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have 5 stories for you from the Malicious Compliance subreddit. The Karma Stories podcast is published to all major podcasting platforms, and you can also read along on YouTube under our @Karma Stories podcast handle. Alright, on to the stories. Let's jump right in. This story comes to us from Meowsasaurus. Mom splits hairs with Nanny to save a few dollars and ends up back paying hundreds. I have been a nanny for several years now, and for the most part, I've worked with lovely, reasonable families. I have contracts for every family that guarantees the hours that I work. Meaning, if a family goes on vacation, I still get paid because I'm technically available to work, but they chose not to use my services. Think gym membership where you pay regardless of whether you've been to the gym in a month. This is standard on nanny contracts. Another bit on my contract is called the nanny share. So if 2 of the families want to combine for the day, each of them pays 2/3 of my regular pay rate. I get paid a little more for watching more kids, and they save a little only paying a portion of what they would have paid. Karen and Ken's family went to Hawaii 3 weeks ago, and per my contract, I was to be paid as usual. Before they left, they asked if I could come in and watch Bob on Sunday after they returned, so that they could recover and rest. I agreed, and my hours were set at 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. that Sunday. They went on the trip, everything was wonderful, and they texted me when they landed saying they would see me at 8 a.m. The next day, when I was about to head out the door at 7:30 a.m., I received a text saying that Bob was just waking up, so I should show up at 8:30 instead. After the day of nannying, Karen asked if I would stay past my regular hours during the upcoming week so that they could have 2 date nights. I agreed, and Karen said she would reimburse me for all the extra hours at the end of the week, since it'd be just easier to make one payment. Totally fine with me. The week finished and I ended up staying an extra 8 hours total for the 2 date nights. I asked Ken to pay me for 16 hours, but he said he had to talk to Karen first to double check hours and would pay me shortly. When I got home, I received a text from Karen saying, "Hi Meowsasaurus, thank you so much for covering for us these past few weeks. Ken and I are feeling refreshed and the show was hilarious. Since we were in Hawaii, you were paid for an entire week while you weren't working. We don't think it's quite fair as it is a large sum of money, so we'd like to apply some of those hours to your babysitting today and yesterday. We will pay you for 8 hours instead." I was furious. I screenshotted the part of my contract that plainly stated I would be paid for any hours that their family was on vacation, and I reminded her that it was in violation of contract. She reluctantly agreed, and I texted that it would be a total of 16 hours. Karen instantly replied and went off, texting, "On Sunday, we asked you to come in at 8:30, not 8. We are already being generous and paying you for the holiday we took. We expect you to track your hours better next time. This is unacceptable. You need to be as accurate as possible with the hours that we are paying you. We will pay you for 15.5 hours. Readers, this was a difference of $12.50. I was going to ignore the part of my contract that said any rescheduling needed a 24-hour notice, but instead, I went nuclear. Bob has been tagging along with Steve and me to music class and soccer twice a week, outside of Karen's regular contracted hours since January. Karen has never offered to pay for those hours, but Henry was fine with paying his full rate for those hours because Steve was having trouble making friends at school and had become close to Bob. I chose not to say anything about the slight bump in pay because I loved watching them play together. Malicious compliance time. As Karen stated, I needed to be as accurate as possible. I calculated all the hours that Bob has joined us since January, 6 hours a week times 18 weeks, and the total amount they owed was almost $2,000. In the group chat with Karen, Ken, and Henry, I said, Karen stated that it was of utmost importance that I track the hours as accurately as possible. So I took it upon myself to double check everything, including the share hours. Thank goodness I did. I didn't realize we had forgotten to track all the hours that Bob joined us for soccer and music. Henry, I'm so sorry. Karen actually owes you quite a bit of money. If my calculations are correct, they owe X amount to you and Y amount to me. Henry replied, Karen and Ken, I'm so disappointed to hear that Meowsosaurus hasn't been compensated properly this entire time. I don't need my money to be refunded for those hours because I wanted Steve to continue his playdates, but you need to pay Meowsosaurus' portion immediately. I got a huge chunk of money I wasn't expecting, and I am now on the hunt for my next nanny family. I'll be putting my 2 weeks notice with Karen and Ken as soon as I do. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Upset Pachyderm. It says, "Good for you. It doesn't matter what kind of work you do, wage theft is unacceptable. If they can afford a nanny and vacations in Hawaii, they can certainly afford to pay you your contracted hours." Another commenter down below called Killer T-Cell said, "Also, I caught that she refers to your services as babysitting, which shows how much she doesn't respect your profession." OP responded and said, "Holy crap, you're right. I didn't even catch that. I've just realized they've never referred to me as a nanny, even though I call myself that and Henry calls me that." This is an interesting one because they said that they were being generous by paying what was in the contract. No, it doesn't work that way. It's a contract, it's not being generous. Being generous would be paying over what's in the contract, not just what you're required to pay. And I just want to say I have total respect for all the babysitters and nannies out there because sometimes I have a hard time getting my kids to do what I want. I can't imagine trying to get other kids to do it too. This story comes to us from Blue Skies 5 Eva. "No maps? I can do that." So my father and I have had a stilted relationship for a long while, but in recent years, he has been trying to extend an olive branch, and I've been trying to accept. This is confounded by the fact that, presented with any difficulty, he reverts to the bullheadedness that was a large part of breaking up our relationship in the past. Normally, we take a small vacation once a year or two, just as father and son, to some mutual interest place. Typically, I do my level best to be driving for at least one leg of the trip, as otherwise, I would have to sit through 2 legs driving barely at the speed limit. Now, a quick A-side that's very relevant, my father has always been very proud of being technologically adverse and slow to adopt new technology, to the point where he exalted over having a smartphone with GPS in 2020. He preferred and prefers a more hands-on way of doing things, such as consulting a physical map to see which roadways are needed to be taken in order to get to a destination. That was fine growing up, but in the modern era, that thinking is just time wasting, in my opinion and experience. Yes, if you're in an area with no coverage, you're crap out of luck, but offline maps exist for a reason. I digress. On our most recent trip, my father was lamenting to me about how the youth of today can't function without our devices in our hands, and how he misses being able to take a trip out into the wild roads that is. No one in our family has ever been a fan of camping, with merely his sense of direction and general sense of roads being his guide. He bemoaned how I barely even pay attention to street signs, relying almost entirely on maps telling me when to turn, and that we're all living far too fancily or something. Now, normally I just tune out his extended rants on the decline of society and the sloth of the youth today, but this trip I was feeling rather malicious, as he had previously brought up some of his annoying acts that had initially soured our relationship. So, as I made it downtown, near where I work and where I know 100% of the streets, I leaned over and switched off the GPS and calmly drove over the river into the next county. Cue an absolute mental breakdown from Father Dearest, who demanded to know why I had done that, and a generally sad wailing on how we were now utterly lost and how would we make it back to society. I am slightly exaggerating here, since this was a couple years ago and I don't remember exactly what he said. I turned to him with the widest grin I could muster and asked him in the sweetest, butter wouldn't melt in my mouth voice, "I thought you didn't like using the GPS." Quite unfortunately, he didn't get the hint, or was panicking too hard to, and just stridently demanded that I turn the GPS back on. Unfortunately, deprived of maps as I was, I had to guess where a U-turn would be, and after a couple false starts, I found a nice place to flip back, 5 miles from the river. As stated before, downtown is my wheelhouse, so once we made it back, I just calmly dropped him off at his hotel, no harm done. I don't really have a satisfying ending, but I hopefully don't get any more rants on the uselessness of GPS. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Hobo Freedom. It says, reminds me of the Rand McNally Road Atlas of the US. My family moved quite frequently when I was growing up. This was 2001 to 2008-ish. So before we started driving, Mom and Dad would sit down and figure out our route and use a highlighter to mark it. Eventually, they started switching over to printing out the MapQuest directions. OP responded to this one and said, this sounds incredibly familiar to me. I'm pretty sure my father did the same for long drives, using a highlighter on a disposable map, I guess. Wow, this one brought up a whole bunch of different memories that I hadn't thought about in ages. My parents used to go to the CAA office here, which is the equivalent in Canada to AAA in the States, and they would actually print out a flip map and highlight the route that my parents were going to take to get from up here in Canada to down in Florida where they went for the winter. I remember it being a highlighted route through multiple pages of this flipbook so they could find their way down, way before GPS. This story comes to us from Rude Jeweler 4188. Don't mess with the nerd. For context, this happened in 2016. I, female 19 at the time, was a psychology student. I was relatively new in town and knew basically no one. And because I changed schools after my first year in college, my whole class was already familiar with each other. And I was the new girl. I was quickly adopted by a group of students that became my college friends for the entire graduation. All but one. This one, let's call him Dave, 29, became my boyfriend after around 2 months of me entering the group. He was completely the opposite of me, and to this day, I still don't know what got into me to date someone like him. He was a daddy's boy with an anarchist attitude. Long hair, always wore sandals, smoked cheap cigarettes, didn't work at all. Everything was paid by his dad, including his studies. Me, I was working part-time as a tutor while living with my mom and helping her on the side so she could get her high school diploma. My dad made her drop out before marriage, and she never had the time to do so after divorce. Being the high achiever I am, I always delivered my papers on time, wrote them calmly throughout the available time, and overall never had myself having to do something last minute. He, as you can imagine, wasn't like that at all. I only found out after us and our group got together for 5 group projects. All very important for the final grading of the subjects, mind you. Before that, we only had individual projects, by the way. As per usual, the group decided to be divided into smaller ones so we could work on our sections, and I obviously decided to work with my boyfriend. But he never did anything, and I mean literally. We started fighting, arguing, and cussing at each other on a daily basis. The group also got tired of him, so I started planning my revenge. First, I talked to the group and explained the whole plan. They agreed to sit quietly while I mastered it. Second, I deeply apologized to poor Dave for making him so miserable, and pretended to play cool while the projects were being done. He pretended to do his part while minimally helping to do stuff. Poor guy spent an entire 30 minutes organizing the project's Google Drive. Then, cut to the project's delivery date. They were all supposed to be presented in front of the class, plus the written papers. Me and the group got together to get everything straight, get prepared. Dave was even invited, but never showed. He explained he would read the files on Drive beforehand. On the day of the first project, I initiated my plan. I arrived earlier and went to the teacher's office. I explained what Dave hadn't done all semester, how he never even tried to participate. Then, I showed print screens of our texts about the topic to prove I was telling the truth, followed by the group chat I created to check if the gang would be in on the plan with me, confirming the rest of the group was okay with my decision. I told the teacher that I want him kicked out of the project. He would not get grades for our work. On class, when the group was called first day, we all stood up, including him, but the teacher stopped him before he could join us. Not you, mister, only the ones who actually did the job. He got pale while we started the presentation and left before we ended. The next day, same thing happened for the other 3. He didn't even show up. He only showed up for 2 of the finals too. I ghosted him, ignoring calls and texts, and in school, he even tried to talk to me, but I walked the other way. Well, he was forced to drop college since he failed majority of his classes, and his dad didn't want to continue paying for something he wasn't appreciating. I've never heard from him since then. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Paralyzed78. It says, so rather than just go to your teacher and letting them know Dave wasn't pulling his weight, in your opinion, you stayed in a romantic relationship with someone who you were fighting, cussing, and arguing with on a daily basis just to embarrass him in front of everyone, and then felt the need to gloat about it on Reddit 8 years later for internet points? This does sound a lot like a few other ones that we've read on this channel way back in the past, where projects needed to be done and someone wasn't pulling their weight. Another way to handle this one is on presentation day to pretend that your throat hurts so much. Oh my gosh, I think you're gonna have to present it for us, Dave. Of course, in this case, you probably want the teacher on your side already, so they know that you guys actually did the work and Dave didn't. This is just to publicly humiliate him as well. This story comes to us from Sekila. Beyond time or not at all. I was a piano technician for a while, and my boss lived in another town. He gave me crap a couple of times for being around 5 minutes late after a 2-hour drive, yelling at me that, if you can't be on time, then don't be on my clock, as some kind of threat to my job. So I was scheduled to meet him at a client's house to move and tune a piano. I waited until exactly the time we were scheduled to meet, and then left. I had a booty call around the corner anyway, and that was great. Apparently, he showed up a few minutes late and was pissed that I wasn't there. I told him later that I had been there, waited until the appointed time, and figured that the appointment had been called off, since no one showed up by the scheduled start time, so I left. I found another profession, and I don't think the old fart learned a darn thing. Well, OP, your boss sounds like he was completely out of tune. And I mean, I don't think he was very sharp to begin with. You could say that OP gave into their bass urges while the boss got in trouble. Okay, I apologize. I know there's a key to piano music humor. It's not just black and white. And I don't want to put a damper on your enthusiasm, but you just might have to stay tuned for more. This story comes to us from Can't Stop the Signal. I'm amazed I got that one. Service Industry Compliance. Story time. Background. During an 8-hour shift at a BS temp job spent on my feet, I stopped moving for 2 minutes to take a breath and just enjoy standing still. I happened to yawn discreetly during minute 2. Shift started early morning. During my shift, I work at least 3 times harder and better than the other employees, who spend most of their time effing around on their phones, chatting, and vaping behind the shelves or under the counter. My boss, who is never there, but when she is, takes the time to bitch out anyone she sees, so she's managing her employees, walks by and says, OP, if you've got nothing to do, you need to be cleaning or restocking. Don't just stand there. Malicious Compliance spent the rest of the shift detail cleaning, manually descaling, sterilizing, and polishing an espresso machine for 3 hours, as slowly and thoroughly as possible. It was very relaxing. Then I peaced out. Screw you, manager. Ah yes, the classic if you have time to lean, you have time to clean. Oh gee, I wonder where I heard that one before. Screw you, Rick. If you enjoy daily Reddit stories, I encourage you to follow and add us to your favorites on whichever podcasting platform you enjoy the most. And if you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video. It really helps us out. I thank you for watching and listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.